Welcome back. It's time for Data Point. We are focusing on the cost of the public wage bill. Just recently, the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury spoke about some 80 billion shillings goes into financing that every month, translating to about 960 billion shillings. So let's look at the numbers as contained from a report by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission for the financial year that was ending 2024. The figure was 1.17 trillion shillings in the resources that were spent on the public sector. In 2025, it is projected to rise to 1.25 trillion shillings. I'll be telling you why that figure is important, looking at the facilities or the finances of the country. We are talking about 1 million, just of 1 million employees in the public sector. And so when you do the average, the monthly salary on average for the officers that work in the public service is some 71,000 shillings. But obviously, you have to look at the different cadre as well as what happens with different categories of public officers versus state officers. So let's break it down into the different departments or different sectors. For the ministries, departments and agencies, which is MDAs, we are talking about a wage bill of up to 317 billion shillings. For the teaching service, it is actually the largest, managed by the Teacher Service Commission, TSC, up to 395 billion shillings in public wage bill. Then state officers, those that are at the level of the executive, the judiciary, the legislature, and of course the counties, we are talking about some 3.6 billion shillings per year. The county governments take a wage bill of up to 215 billion shillings, considering the public servants at that level. For public universities, you're talking about 184 billion shillings, while public corporations or parastatals account for 55 billion shillings, giving that total of 1.17 trillion shillings. So the employees in those sectors are 1 million shillings. Let's focus on something else about the public sector wage bill. You're talking about the current ratio of wage bill to the ordinary revenue is at 43%. It has been coming down from upwards of 50% plus. Now, the target, according to the Public Finance Management Act, is supposed to be 35%. So for us to get closer to 35%, the options are two. You can either cut expenditure in the public service or you raise the revenues. Of course, cutting expenditure would be difficult, knowing that there has been a clamor to employ more people in the public service. So the next thing that you look at is that the challenges, according to the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, why the public sector wage bill continues to be expensive for the country. They are talking about duplication of roles in many offices. There is oversplitting of roles. You find people carrying out very small roles when it comes to execution. Then there's weak payroll management. The Control of Budget had spoken about more than 11 billion shillings being spent on employment or remuneration that is outside the electronic payroll. Then low labor productivity has also been reported by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, and talking of the figure that in Kenya, the public sector productivity is $5 per hour. If you have to compare that to a country like Luxembourg, you're talking about $100 per hour, which is 20 times higher than that of Kenya. The other thing that you talk about is the revenues of the country. So at the moment, we are talking about 2.75 trillion shillings in ordinary revenue. These are resources collected from mainly the taxes in the country. But then there's appropriations in aid, the levies that are charged for the services that you access with the government, whether you're applying for a birth certificate, you're applying for an ID card, or renewing one, the driver's licenses and more. You're talking about 567 billion shillings as the income expected by the government for the current financial year. The grants that are to come from development partners of the country are 46.9 billion shillings, and there was a deficit of 923 billion shillings, close to a trillion, which is supposed to be received through borrowing at the domestic market and at the external market. So that gave a total of 4.29 trillion shillings, which is also the amount that is in the budget, or what you may call the expenditure. Let's take a look at what else that means, because at the moment, in terms of the expenditure of the government, the recurrent expenditure is 3.13 trillion shillings. This means operations and maintenance costs for the government. So out of the 4.29 trillion shillings. 3.13 goes to recurrent expenditure. For development, you only have about 693 billion shillings, and the counties receive up to 475 billion shillings from the budget, but out of this is only 405, which is the equitable allocation, meaning that the counties are sharing equally an allocation of 405 billion shillings from the national revenues. That gives you a total of 4.29 trillion shillings. So now let's take a look at an important figure, which I told you about earlier on. So the ordinary revenue, the taxes of the country, you're getting 2.7 trillion shillings. But the wage bill, meaning the employees of the government, they are taking 1.17 trillion shillings. There are 1 million of them taking that money. At the same time, we are using more than 1.7 trillion shillings to service debt. So you're talking about repaying of debt as well as paying interest on the debts that we have taken, whether it's at the local market or externally. If you do the math, 1.17 trillion shillings plus 1.7 trillion shillings gets you to about 2.8 trillion shillings. That figure is higher than the ordinary revenues you're collecting of 2.7 trillion shillings. It means that for us to continue financing other operations of the government, we depend on the levies and fees that you pay, which is a maximum of less than 600 billion shillings, but the balance of that would have to borrow. Let's take a look at why that is the case. So remember, I told you of the deficit of 923 billion shillings for this current year. We are borrowing at the local market 635 billion shillings. From the external market, you're borrowing 288 billion shillings. So this is how we're managing to finance other operations, including sometimes even paying the salaries. And we are also talking about the debt servicing that I just mentioned of 1.7 trillion shillings. And at the moment, based on the numbers from the Central Bank of Kenya, the public debt is at 12 trillion shillings. So very expensive public sector wages. At the same time, very expensive recurrent expenditure, but also the debt that you have taken, the servicing. You can imagine borrowing 923 billion shillings, the amount of interest that you also have to pay, adding up to the cost of running government. And that is a data point for this week for you to think about as we progress. That's data point.